This gaming PC is the Cyberpower Ultra 7 RTX, and if that name sounds familiar, Dominic reviewed a PC with this very name back in April 2019, but it's a completely different PC. They've recycled the name, so do not be fooled by the title on this video. This is a Ryzen 5000 processor with an RTX 30 series graphics card, so it's all brand new hardware. The mouse, keyboard and monitor are not part of the PC package, but when I checked the configurator on Cyberpower's website, it turns out you can in fact buy this very same Razer mouse and keyboard from their website, along with pretty much every other component on the planet. Cyberpower's website is a thing to behold. You know full well right now suppliers of processors and graphics cards are an absolute blooming nightmare. The Samsung 980 Pro, which is installed in this PC, it's a 1TB SSD, is listed on Cyberpower's website at the moment as out of stock. This whole global supply problem, it's an absolute nightmare for us all. So this PC has a hard to come by graphics card, a hard to come by processor, and at the moment it would seem an impossible to come by SSD. I think I'm going to clear the decks of this monitor and desktop set and give you a closer look at what's going on. Before I proceed, let me just turn off the RGB so you can see that I'm serious. Have you subscribed to Kit Guru Tech? If not, why not do it now? And while you're at it, do please ring the bell. The package you get with the Cyberpower Ultra 7 RTX is fairly conventional for a small system integrator, so all the bits and pieces packed in the motherboard box, which looks to me like a retail motherboard box, and includes a set of instructions. Important, read this first. They want you to open the chassis, remove the packaging that comes inside it, which acts as a support for the graphics card and the various components, and the idea obviously is you remove that so the fans can turn, which is humorous, as you will understand in just a moment. The snag here is these are generic instructions. They refer to removing the two thumb screws on the side panel and lifting it off. However, this case is a Lian-Li Lancool 2 mesh, a case I think I saw at CES at the very start of this year, but have not done a review of. Not because I got anything against Lian-Li, very far from it, but their marketing in the UK is peculiar to say the least. So this is the first time I've actually had this case on my bench, as it were, and I'm very pleased to see it. Also, I'm going to give you a heads up here. It looks like a blooming good case. So how do you get inside the Lian-Li? You fold down this magnetically retained cover and you open the glass. And now you're inside. So if you're looking for thumb screws, good luck. Really neat. The magnets feel strong. Panels swing open beautifully easily. Top-notch work. When you're inside, you pull out the packaging and you're good to go. You will note the 6 RGB fans, 3 in the front, 2 in the roof, 1 in the rear, are rotating. When I received the PC and turned it on, they did not do that. Reaches for remote, click button. What I got was this, in, as I recall, red. It's all down to the remote control. Cyberpower uses their own RGB fan hub controller on the rear panel of the case to such an extent that they actually remove Lian-Li's own fans. I think there's only 2 in the box. Yep, 2 fans in. Nope, my mistake. 3 fans in the box have all been removed but supplied, so you're not being ripped off, and they install 6 of their own fans in the case. So when I turned it on and the fans were dead stopped, and I thought, oh lordy, what's going on here? Then I had a word with them, reached for the remote, clicked the plus button, and away we go. There are 5 steps to the fan control. I'm not certain what the increments are because it's all done through their hub. It's entirely opaque to the end user. And I think back to the white light. Let's give you a quick look at the rainbow. You see, you can have the proper RGB experience, but I'm going to settle for white. So the case, Lian-Li Lancool 2 mesh, looks like a good one to me. Happy with that. Motherboard, MSI X570-A Pro, a motherboard I haven't reviewed and I don't think Luke has reviewed. It has, shall we say, a certain reputation for having weak VRMs. Hardware on box really laid into this motherboard. So my first port of call was just to do a quick run in Blender and see what happened to VRM temperatures. And the fact of the matter is they're absolutely fine in this configuration. I'm not taking any exception to what Hardware Unboxed has said, but with this motherboard, in this case, with 6 fans blowing in all directions and an 8-core Ryzen 7 5800X, the VRMs are absolutely fine and they run cooler than the CPU. I've got no problem with this configuration the way it comes. If you want to start overclocking your Ryzen 7 or you want to go to the 12 core or the 16 core, I can't speak to that. I am going to say in this configuration that motherboard seems to be absolutely fine. Having said that, if you want to upgrade, and I don't see any reason not to upgrade to a B550, perhaps the Asus Tough Gaming board, why not? That's also in the configurator. That might be a good idea. But this board, which I first saw and thought, oh no, please don't do that, it's okay. One annoyance, however, of the two annoyances of the MSI, it doesn't have an internal USB Type-C header. So the front panel on the case, which does have a hole for a Type-C, there's no connector there. I guess Cyberpower's removed it from the chassis because there's nothing to connect it to. Now the worst case for me would be having the connector which isn't connected to the motherboard. That'd be terrible. But not having anything inside the case, rather than say blanking the hole, I'm not best pleased about that. But surely the obvious thing is to install a motherboard that has the Type-C. It's the very end of 2020. We've got a week to go to 2021. Type-C, please. I mean, this is a £2 PC. The second annoyance of this motherboard is it has no M.2 heat spreaders, heat sinks if you like. So our Samsung 980 Pro SSD, 1TB of loveliness, is sitting there and it's bare. Now I think the SSD looks great. I mean, it's an M.2 SSD, but the 980 Pro is shouting at you. It's saying, I'm a 980 Pro, and it is. The thing is, it can get hot. In regular gaming use, the SSD runs at around the 40-something Celsius, which is fine, no problem there. But you only have to run Crystal Disk Mark for a short time. It runs in a few minutes, and the temperature got to about 70, 72 Celsius. This is an ambient of 19, and that's not great. Samsung's own Magician software says that's too hot. I have not seen any indication this SSD gets anywhere close to throttling, but if you were to really pummel it with a load of hard work, I can't say that it wouldn't have problems. I would much prefer to see a motherboard with a heat spreader on the M.2. But once again, there are 6 fans flowing air in this case. This case flows air and it's got a load of fans moving the air through it. So I do not have a problem with this. Then we have the Ryzen 7 5800X. Luke loved this processor, except for the point that it's too expensive. But 8 cores of fast AMD processor. It's Zen 3 architecture and it's running at 4.6 GHz all cores. It's a beast of a processor and it does a really fine job. The memory that's installed is 16 GB of HyperX Fury DDR4 3200. We were originally told to expect Corsair Vengeance LPX, which superficially looks very similar at the same speed. It's likely your PC would come with either Corsair or HyperX. Quite frankly, provided it's the same speed and the same timings, I wouldn't have an issue with that. Once again, availability of supply of memory, it's hard. The CPU cooler is interesting. It is a Cooler Master Masterliquid Lite 360. Look on Cooler Master's website, you won't find it. You'll find a 240, but the 360 is OEM only, for the likes of Cyberpower. So that cooler is sat in the front of the case, and I have to say that the pump control wire looks a little bit meh, but the cooler itself looks like any all-in-one. Obviously the hoses there are taking a load of space in the middle of the case, but it's doing a job. I don't have a particular problem with it. Corsair RM 750X, and it's rated gold. That's certainly enough power for this PC, which draws about 400 watts under maximum load, so we've got plenty of headroom. Gold rating is acceptable. You know full well we like our titanium and platinum rated power supplies at Kit Guru. Unfortunately, that adds to the cost. The MSI motherboard doesn't have Wi-Fi. Cyberpower clearly regards this as important as a feature, and they've included a Wi-Fi 6 card that is Intel AX200 powered. If you're configuring this PC and you want Wi-Fi, it's probably as easy to choose a motherboard that has Wi-Fi, and while you're at it, M.2 heat spreaders and an internal Type-C connector. But in the circs, this motherboard with this add-in card, it gives you the feature, and the Wi-Fi works perfectly well. The graphics card is an MSI RTX 3070 Ventus 2X OC with 8GB of GDDR6. I take it that the 2X refers to the dual fans. As far as I'm aware, Dominic has not reviewed this particular graphics card. He's reviewed an MSI 3070 3X. The key point that I noted during my testing is that the GPU clocked at 1875 MHz when it was gaming, which seems pretty decent to me. My figures during testing came out somewhat worse than Dominic's 3070s, but not by a huge amount. So my appraisal is that this 3070 is competent, it's not cutting edge, but it's perfectly decent. Temperatures of that little cooler, absolutely fine. You're looking at 70 Celsius. The quality of Cyberpower's build, very professional. Cables are perfectly decent. Nonetheless, you have got the hoses and the liquid cooler running through the middle of the chassis. The glass has a very slight tint to it, but you can see what's going on inside the case without any difficulty, particularly with all the RGB. Having said all that, the Lian-Li case is superb for hiding all the nonsense. Magnetic flap there, covers up all the gubbins in the lower half. Go around the back side, you've got glass, but you've also got modesty panels. Everything but everything is hidden away. The only thing on show is the RGB fan hub. It's a really neat build in a superb case. I want to review this case. I mean, it's probably too late to review the Lian-Li Lancool 2 now, but when the next version comes out, I'm going to make absolutely certain I get one into review. Frankly, if they don't offer it, I'll buy one. That's my commitment at the end of 2020. So the quality of the build is fine, no argument there. Performance, this is a 1440p gaming PC that can just about do 4K. But clearly, if you go back to all of Dominic's graphics reviews and dwell on the 3070 figures and then go to Luke's review of the Ryzen 7 5800X, take those two things, mash them together, and you know what you're dealing with. 8 cores of decent Zen 3 CPU, with a competent cooler on board and a graphics card that does a decent job. It's not absolute bleeding edge. You haven't got 12 or 16 cores, you haven't got a 3080, 3090 or the highest end AMD graphics card, but you've got good stuff at sensible money, and that's the important thing. This 2 grand PC could be improved. I would personally expand the 1TB M.2 SSD with a hard drive, say 2, 4, maybe even 6, but 2 or 4 terabytes. That can go down the bottom, no problem whatsoever. There's plenty of space, but it has to be said that that 1TB SSD is blazing fast, and any extra storage you add, relatively speaking, is going to crawl along. 16GB of DDR4 3200 MHz memory. I had a conversation with Luke about this. We are deeply in love with the Vengeance LPX from Corsair that's dual rank, so it's 32 gig in 2 modules. That really helps performance. If you look at Luke's review of this processor and look at my figures, you will see that this is doing perfectly okay. Luke's has the edge, and the memory I'm quite sure is a part of it, because the X570 motherboard is doing a reasonable job. So the memory is marginal. 3200 MHz on Zen 3 can be improved with 3600 MHz, but bump it up to dual rank 32GB kit. That will help for sure. Nonetheless, as a daily driver, I doubt you will feel this is lacking. It's just there is scope for improvement. A subtle distinction, but important. Power supply, absolutely fine. Motherboard, as I've mentioned, there's a few issues with that. Nothing too dramatic, but personally, this would not be my first choice of motherboard. Cyberpower offers models I would prefer to have over this for very similar money. So this is just, to my mind, not the ideal choice. The case, yup, indeed. The way they've gone around the fans, it's peculiar. Ripping out the stock fans, which are then supplied to the customer and supplying their own fans with their own fan controller. I can see what they're doing, and they haven't got to worry about how many fan connectors they have on the motherboard. They haven't got to go in the BIOS and configure things. They just bung in their own setup, and it works. Provided, of course, you dig out the fan controller from the box and you understand you might have to click it on if it's been delivered with the fans at 0 speed. Possibly I got unlucky there, but if you're in the same boat, do please put a comment below. So I can see why Cyberpower's done that, but it does feel really strange. The motherboard manufacturers work to develop PWM control for fans and their control software and their BIOS settings, and the fan manufacturers do the same, and then Cyberpower pulls them out and puts their own gear in. Nonetheless, this configuration works. When I did my first stress test with the Cyberpower Ultra 7 RTX, I semi-expected it to be a bit of a beast. I thought the processor might get rather hot, and I thought the graphics card would howl away while the case did its best to keep everything in check. And not true. If it wasn't for the fact it's pelting with rain outside, I'd give you some audio checks of how quiet it is, but the fact is the weather is louder than the fans. It's an impressive build. It delivers the goods. In a long gaming session you can expect the graphics and the CPU to sit at a steady 70. If you really lean on the CPU, say in Blender, the CPU will go up to 81, 82 Celsius. But that's what AMD does. They deliver every last scrap of performance in the silicon, and it will just get an equilibrium of power, heat and clock speed. And I have to say, I'm impressed by what I've seen. It's an unusual and quirky PC in many respects, but it delivers the goods, and as a 1440p gaming system, there are very few causes for complaint.